This is Hashtag Finance, presented to you by the Canadian Securities Exchange, the exchange for entrepreneurs. With your host, Barrington Miller.
Hi, welcome to Hashtag Finance. I'm your host, Barrington Miller from the Canadian Securities Exchange. And today I'm here with Andrew Thut, CIO of 4Front, proudly listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange. How are you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about 4Front. We're just going to go right into this.
Sure. So 4Front is, what is called a multi-state operator. We have operations in 5 core states. So Washington State, which is really our flagship facility, and then we have operations in Massachusetts, Illinois, Michigan. We're expanding into California here in Q2. And the only state that I haven't mentioned, which is a potential 6th state, is we have an application pending in New Jersey, which we hope to hear on in the not too distant future.
We hear a lot about multi-state operators, or for our audience, MSOs.
Mm-hmm.
What is the appeal? What is the strategic initiative behind being a multi-state operator in the cannabis sector?
Yeah, so it's an interesting landscape in the U.S. Because it's not federally illegal. It's not federally legal. Cannabis is not federally legal in the U.S. Each state has sort of put their own regulations around how they want to legalize cannabis, and it's a lot like operating in Europe. So unlike Canada, where you have federal legalization and you can distribute nationally, in the U.S. we're kind of subject to each state's regulations, and you can't take cannabis. If you grow cannabis in Massachusetts, you can't take cannabis over state lines. And so what people have done in the early days of U.S. cannabis, people tried to get licenses in every single state they possibly could. So if you looked at a comp table from Canaccord, 3 years ago, one of the big metrics that they'd show was how many states this MSO is in. This one's in 12 states, this one's in 15 states. And while that's obviously important to have a big addressable market, what ended up happening it's really tough to replicate operations in 17 states. And so they're in the car. So one of the things that we have done is we took a lot more measured approach to the number of states we're in. So we wanted to be in large nascent recreational markets and not have to bear the brunt of having to replicate operations across 12 different, it was just too much to finance, and it was too much to tackle from a human resources standpoint. And so our focused approach is really going after these large nascent rec markets where we can be, a pretty serious player. And which is, so an addressable market matters in the US. You obviously want a big addressable market to attack, but being stretched too thin is also a peril in this industry, as a lot of folks who tried to do too much kind of fell on their faces.
Now, you've, we were talking off camera, and, you're a capital markets person. What would this Andrew go and tell the Andrew of 3 years ago, 5 years ago? What are some of the speed bumps and lessons learned in getting 4Front to where it is today?
I think that in the early days of cannabis, it was people were really focused on the financial engineering aspects of building a business, grabbing those licenses in all these different states. And, it makes sense coming from an investor standpoint. My first career was in the investment industry. You want to be able to show a potential investor that, you have a really big addressable market that you want to attack. And what we found here in the US is that money wasn't readily available to build out these facilities in all these other states. Money raising in the US where it's federally illegal, you don't have access to banks, you don't have access to the exchanges, you don't have access to the typical institutional investors who would finance these businesses if it wasn't federally illegal. So the capital raising was really hard. And then, trying to recruit real talent into a federally illegal business to do all this was really, really hard. And so I think that we got really excited hey, we see this nascent opportunity and this is going to be huge and we're going to be big players. And what we found is that, being super wide and thin was not a winning strategy. And so I think that the lesson that we learned was it's better to be a little bit more narrow in terms of the actual addressable market and go deep in those markets rather than be, super wide and thin.
We're going to touch upon something that you mentioned earlier, and that is your background. Can you tell us a little bit about Andrew pre 4Front?
Sure. I started my career, I spent most of my career in Boston, and I started as a very junior investment banker in the technology industry. And then in my mid-20s, I jumped over to the money management industry. So I was at two large firms, MFS in Boston, and then at BlackRock, which is now, a behemoth. But I was working on their small cap growth products, both as a research analyst and a portfolio manager. And so I made the jump to the cannabis industry in 2013 when one of my cohorts in the finance industry started 4Front and got interested in, that's an interesting opportunity. And I sort of started as an investor. And as I was looking to kind of switch my career up a little bit, I sort of made the jump to, come on board as really in the role that I have right now, where, I'm really focused on the capital raising aspects and the investor relations aspects of building the business.
Two things that I find really interesting when I get to meet people like yourselves on how they got started. It's usually I had a buddy that made a call, or somebody reached out, and I thought, why not? So I always find that interesting.
True. And I actually have to credit my wife because, I had sort of played it straight for the first part of my career. I was, out of college, investment banking, money management, and, it was I feel like I got on a treadmill and I never got off until I was 40 years old. And, when I had left BlackRock, I was sort of, thinking about, other opportunities in the finance field. And this thing at 4Front came up, and I said to my wife, we're talking, 7 years ago at this point. And, cannabis was a lot more taboo then than it is now. And I really credit my wife, who had sort of seen, me being very stressed out about chasing performance, in a money management role. And she's like, going through the cannabis thing. And I sort of said, are you really comfortable being married to the weed guy and going to, garden club and having that be who you're married to? And she's like, yeah, like, go do it. And so, what started out as sort of a lark, has turned into, at least a second career. And whether I have a third or fourth one, we'll see. But it's been an incredibly interesting and fun ride. The intellectual exercise and 4Front, the intellectual exercise of figuring out that you have this nascent industry where, how are you going to attack it? What is the best business model to attack it? What skill sets do you need to bring to the table to really create and monopolize on this opportunity that's in front of you? It's been a really interesting intellectual puzzle to solve. And I think that one of the good things about the industry and particularly in our company is we've seen it evolve from being a theoretical thing where you had a bunch of finance guys in trying to figure out how to get licenses to the industry is increasingly more handed over to the operators. Because yes, it's okay. It's, as we were talking about earlier, it's good to have licenses in a bunch of different states. But what we really need to know is how to grow and sell weed. And that is a, getting your hands dirty, blocking and tackling business. And, we've sort of made that transition to being an operator-led company in earnest last year. And I think that execution aspect of this industry is, really and truly going to be the long-term driver of value creation.
It's it's not only the intellectual exercise of trying to fit that puzzle. That puzzle happens to keep moving. It happens to keep shifting.
Moving target, isn't it?
It's, a few years ago, it was all buzz was vertical integration.
Mm-hmm.
Vertical integration. If you were vertically integrated, then that's great. You were at the top of the pile. And then, last year, year before, it's, well, we can't be experts in every single phase of the operation. So we're going to take a different approach. And we haven't even gotten into the political arena.
Well, it's interesting, right? It'd be like getting into the sweater business or the t-shirt business and having to, okay, well, let's start growing the cotton, and then let's start processing the cotton, and then let's figure out how to make this thing, and then we've got to distribute it and have stores that we're going to sell it in. It's an incredibly big
and by the way, that cotton is federally illegal, and you can't travel from state to state or import it or export it.
And one of the things that we figured out is, and this is kind of 4Front's, I think that it's really our competitive advantage, is we figured out how to produce at a low cost. So our operations in Washington State, Washington's probably the most competitive market in the country. And so when they legalized for recreational use in Washington State, they basically gave licenses to everyone who wanted one. And so you had tons of capacity, you had tons of weed in the market, pricing plummeted, and people were like, well, geez, how do you make any money doing this? And, our CEO, Leo Gontmaker, they came from he comes from a very entrepreneurial family, one of the largest seafood distributors in the world. And they figured out that, to survive in this industry, you need to wring the cost out. And so in the most competitive market in the country, our facilities are driving over 25% EBITDA margins, selling weed, at under $1,000 a pound. So, which is pretty incredible. And so, and the other aspect that sort of dovetails into this concept is that there is an awful lot of price elasticity in cannabis markets, meaning that if you can sell a product cheaper, you're going to take outsized market share. And given that we've sort of dialed in low cost production and full automation of our facilities, that allows us to produce that product cheaper and offer it to consumers at a cheaper price. And that has led to, close to 10% market share in Washington State. And we're simply transforming and porting those standard operating procedures and those products from Washington into these other states where you're selling weed for $4,000 a pound. And so that margin differential is huge. And we have a lot of room to lead on price in those markets and take a lot of share, and very minimally eat into our very robust margin profile.
We did and we were talking about this, my colleague Anil and I were talking about 520. That was the cannabis event we ran last year virtually. You can check it out on CSE_TV on YouTube. And one of the discussions we had to do with the event that would shape and change the cannabis industry forever in the United States. And it had nothing to do with banking. It had nothing to do with legalization. It had to do with interstate travel.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were able to move product from one state to the next, that would have the biggest and most profound impact on the cannabis industry the world has ever seen. How do you feel about that, being a multi-state operator and being able to sort of transplant one idea from one state into the other? Do you see that as being helpful?
No, I think that you're right. I think that, you know, interstate commerce and banking are the two things that are just going to be earth shattering for this industry. And I think, you know, our chances of banking coming sooner rather than later are pretty high. The interstate commerce one is really interesting because, you know, you have areas of the country like Oregon and Washington. You know, Oregon's floating in weed. And then you have places like, you know, Pennsylvania where, you know, there isn't enough weed to stock the stores. And the reason for that is you can't take it over state lines. And so um, one of our biggest fears when we got into this industry, you know, building these big indoor cultivation centers was, are you building a dinosaur? You know, shoot, when the walls come down and, you know, all this weed comes in from Oregon, you know, do you have a high cost production facility that just can't compete with that? And so we've always had an eye on that. And so the way that we kind of think about it is we are building cultivation. We're a really efficient cultivator. We as a company, uh, we have yields in our cultivation facilities approaching 400 grams a square foot, which is, we think, about double the MSO average, more or less. It's hard to totally pinpoint it, but very efficient cultivation facilities. But the way that we think about it is we want to be a finished goods manufacturer. We want to have vape pens, edibles, tinctures, lozenges, all of that stuff. We want to look like a consumer packaged goods company. And so to the extent that we need organic material to feed that process, we're going to go out and grow it. But longer term, we don't want to be farmers. We want to be finished goods manufacturers. And so a case in point is we are currently building a 185,000 square foot production facility in Southern California, where we are not going to cultivate at all, or we have no intentions to right now. We are using oil that are going to go into our fully automated facility that looks like, you know, the Mars Candy Company. And we can make 30,000 boxes of our signature edible square in one shift using 5 people. So that kind of automation that we're able to bring to that market is a huge deal. And so we feel like we're set up pretty well to, if the walls do come down, to ship those finished goods across the country. But I think that we're years away from that. And
Oh,
you know, there
really?
are structural things that I could get into on why I think we're a couple of years. We're a long way from that, but I think we're a long way from that. You know,
Okay.
these states have asked all of us to invest millions of dollars. In Massachusetts, they've asked us, you know, to go through years of red tape and invest millions of dollars building out these facilities. That state, Massachusetts, can't just say, oh, by the way, guys, we're gonna like all this weed from Oregon be imported. And the incumbents, you know, fair or not, are going to fight that tooth and nail. And so, you know, first you got to get federal legalization, and then you have to get states on board with, you know, bringing down the walls. And I just think it's going to be a long time coming.
Um, I started laughing when you said we're not farmers. One of our other CSE listed companies, Harvest, their CEO,
Steve, he's the
he said
best.
that in a presentation. He's
He's a
like,
great guy.
yeah, really good guy.
Yeah.
But he stood up and said, "We're not here to be farmers.
No.
I'm not. Nothing against farmers. That's not what we're here for." And it's, you know, you start to see a lot of similarities as you talk to, you know, the successful ones, or the ones that are deemed successful.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, no, it's pretty funny. So
Right now, we want to be, if you're in the t-shirt business, like you got to have that raw material, and
yeah,
down the road, you're going to be able to have a supply chain that gives you that raw material. But as it stands, in a lot of states, you got to go and make it yourself. And so that's where we are, but totally agree. Like, growing plants is a commodity, and will continue to commoditize as will everything else. But the plant in particular is going to commoditize the fastest. And there are folks that know how to do this stuff at scale, and they're growing it indoor under lights. So the farming aspect probably has a long tail, but ultimately that's going to be handed over to the agricultural community that knows what they're doing.
what has been the easiest state to deal with, and what has been, I guess, one that's been more complicated or posed more challenges for your business?
I think that Massachusetts has been an incredibly difficult state to operate in. And part of that is because, the way that Massachusetts is set up, the towns in Massachusetts have a lot of discretion on what goes on in their towns. The local governments are set up at the town level, not the county level. And so, you had an issue where you had to get a letter from every single town that you wanted to operate in. And there was a lot of, not in my backyard stuff going on. And then, you had a lot of friction at the state level, in terms of the rollout and stuff that they, kinks that they've gotten better at. And that, things are starting to speed up in Massachusetts, but it was an incredibly tough place to start a business.
I've heard that.
We went adult use 3 years after we thought we were going to go adult use, 2 years after we thought we were going to go adult use. Juxtapose that to Illinois, where, they sort of said, okay, we've legalized and we're going to start to, and they rolled out recreational, months later. And the inspector comes into your building and says, this all looks very reasonable. I'd like another camera up there. But we're good to go. In Massachusetts in the early days, that process would have taken 5 months. You would have said, okay, we're going to get the camera in there. The inspector's you're going to get on the inspector's schedule 6 weeks from now. And then you're going to wait for, that to be processed. And just, it was a very slow state to operate in. And I think that as regulators and the citizenry in every state gets more and more comfortable with the concept of cannabis, that you can have a grow in the corner of your town and it's not going to attract gangsters and crime, and you're going to have a dispensary that people are going to walk by that can be next to an ice cream store and no one really cares. It's not a big deal. But people kind of needed to see how it was going to work in real life before they really believed that. And so I think that people seeing how these programs have rolled out across the country and seeing that there isn't a lot of crime associated with them, or there's barely any crime associated with them. And people have just gotten a lot more comfortable. And I think that's really helped the speed of the implementation.
You mentioned a little bit about what's in store for 4Front in 2021. Is there anything else you can allude to, if not only 2021, but beyond?
Two things in particular. We're launching a 185,000 square foot facility in Commerce, California, which we think is going to be the largest cannabis processing facility in the world, to our knowledge. And with the scale and the automation that we're bringing, we think that we can offer the California market a product that will be lower in costs than the illicit market by 20 to 30%. And we will still be able to drive 30 to 40% EBITDA margins out of that state. So that's a huge catalyst and a huge proof of concept for 4Front as we roll through this year. And we plan to launch that in May. The other thing that we had sort of mentioned on our last earnings call is our expansion in the Illinois market. We have one of the licenses that allows for 210,000 square feet of canopy in Illinois. There are only 20 of them out there. Currently, we only have 9,000 square feet of canopy. And Illinois is a fantastic market in terms of fairly limited licenses, huge population, a lot of tourism, surrounded by states like Indiana that don't even have medical programs. So, they're terrific markets. And so as we roll, into 2021, I think that you're going to hear 4Front talking about, a big expansion in Illinois to more fully utilize that market or that license that we have that allows for 210,000 square feet, which will be, which we anticipate will be massively accretive to the end of 22 and our 23 numbers.
We're approaching near the end time for our #finance episode. What is one good thing you want to leave investors with, or our audience and listeners with? And what is one, I'm not going to say cautionary tale, but just advice for people either wanting to get into the industry or wanting to invest or wanting to learn more? Just a chance to espouse your wisdom.
Yeah, I think that investors should know what they own. We get a lot of calls from folks. You'll talk to them about, say, "Oh, I'm really interested in getting into the space," and you'll find that there's some really rudimentary things about the industry that they don't understand, such as cannabis can't be taken over state lines, and so before you sort of jump in, sort of educate yourself on what sort of the rules of the road are and sort of what the playing field looks like. And also along that road, this is an industry that's full of hype, and that hype kind of died down, about a year ago. It was big 2 years ago, and then sort of died down, and now it's hyping back up. And there are a lot of people that are talking very big games, and I think that what investors should focus on, and this sort of harkens back to my small cap growth investing days. Look at the track record of what that company's been able to do. And yes, there's a lot of times a very big disconnect from what people say they'll be able to achieve and what they can actually operationally achieve. So just be wary of throwing money indiscriminately at names in this, because there are going to be a lot of losers. And I think that there are going to be, a lot of companies that do incredibly well in this space, but it's there's a fair amount of there's some paper tigers out there for sure. What I'm most excited about is I said this on a presentation about 2 weeks ago. I think that we are very literally entering the golden age of cannabis right now, where you have a blue Congress here in the US. You have a vice president who was co-author of some of the legalization legislation that has been working its way through Congress. And we think that there's a chance that, we might get banking. Cannabis companies might get access to banking as soon as March. And that is an absolute game changer for this industry. It allows us to, have better access to capital, and the cost of capital goes down. It allows us to have access to U.S. exchanges. Fidelity, BlackRock, they've been very reticent to invest in U.S. companies that are doing something illegal. And with federal banking reform, we think that some of those institutions, and a lot of those institutions, will start to, invest in earnest in what is an incredible $100 billion growth industry in the U.S. And so those companies that are proven operators and have a very how should I say, have a very reasonable and measured growth plan in front of them. Those, I think that they're just going to be great stocks to own during this period. And as the capital continues to come into this industry, I think that you could see a lot of multiple expansion. People look at it kind of the bellwethers in the cannabis industry. They're trading at 15 times next year's EBITDA. And, in a lot of cases, they're growing 100% year over year. Those just are not very expensive multiples for the kind of growth that this industry has in front of us. So, I think that there's a lot of room for massive multiple expansion, cost of capital coming down, margins going up. We're entering a really exciting phase for cannabis right now.
Andrew, on behalf of the Canadian Securities Exchange, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank 4Front for its continued listening with us, and for you sharing your knowledge, sharing your wisdom, and sharing your experiences with our audience and our listeners. So on behalf of the
Much
CSE,
appreciated. It was a pleasure to be here.
on behalf of the CSE, we want to say thanks. We wish you continued success today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Thank you so much.
Barrington Miller. And this has been an episode of #Finance.